Hi, my name is Tim Benedict, and this is my presentation on assistive technology and specifically sip and puff switches. Just some of the things we are going to cover. Sorry that my caption box is blocking some of it, but I believe this is going to be okay going forward. So let's dive in. So what is a sip and puff switch? Well, a sip and puff switch is a device that allows you to control multiple devices through one piece of equipment, through one switch. So you either sip or inhale to trigger one action, or you blow and exhale to trigger another. This is all done by air pressure. So it's ideal for individuals who can't trigger devices by touch or have limited capabilities of their extremities. And most common ways that sip and puff switches are designed are either with wands, tubes, or straws. You can see a very common mounted one in the picture provided. And since it's a switch technology, it sends signals electronically, but they must be connected to an external device or devices that will translate that electric code into a compatible signal for what you're trying to trigger. And in that way, it's very customizable. Software in the external device interprets the electric signals that then go into other devices, be it a computer or wheelchair, and it turns that signal into something that can control complex functions. So many devices can be calibrated um, for the individual user. It's not always this intense, blowing and sipping. You can change the sensitivity if the user doesn't have that much power in their in their mouth for sipping and puffing. But also, like, if it's to be generating text or like speech generation, you can adjust the speed to which the signal will translate um that information into text. So just a little history about sip and puff switches. While the computer linked sip and puff switches that we see modeled after today was created by Bill Cameron in the early 1980s, um, he's a Canadian that was an inventor and scientist that decided to design a modernized version of this for his cousin Neil Squire, who became quadriplegic after a car accident. It was originally translated into Morse code based on puff and switch for the dashes to spell out something. And the organization that founded that, now called the Neil Squire Foundation, they continue to work to improve communications using the sip and puff. But what I found very interesting was there's a long history of other devices that were used to convert signals from the user to communicate messages. The patient operated selector mechanism was a popular one created in the UK in the 60s. It also used air pressure to provide multiple ways to control a standard typewriter for individuals to communicate. You can see a picture of it down here on the right. And through research, there was many different ways, not necessarily all sip and puff, but many different ways that technology was created to allow individuals to communicate if they were unable to in conventional ways. So for some of the people that would really benefit from using a sip and puff switch, include but not limited to those who have limited or no physical motor capabilities. That could be like quadriplegics, people who can't use their hands maybe to type out, but have access and use of their mouth and their face. People with ALS, cerebral palsy, the individuals that suffer severe spinal cord injuries and traumatic brain injuries, and also MS or multiple sclerosis. So part of the thing that makes using sip and puff on the internet and with computers a possibility is that websites that are being generated follow the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it's an international standard for digital accessibility. So there are like specific criteria that when are met can make web content reliably accessible with assistive technology, especially SIP and puff switches. Some of the ones that I found were the criterion 2.1.1 for keyboard, where all functionality of the content is operable through a keyboard without requiring specific timing for keystrokes. So like content doesn't need to necessarily be created that requires the use of a mouse to navigate. Another one is the 1.3.1 information relationships. This is where content should be created and formatted in manners that translate to assistive technology that presents the information in a way that makes sense to the user, right? So the ability for word and context to be translated semantically to audio or braille, so that like even if they are using assistive technology, the information on the websites needs to be able to be perceived and understood by users depending on their disability. And another one that I found was the 2.4.1 bypass blocks. This is like a mechanism that allows for skipping the repetitive elements that fills pages. Like think about if you ever look at a recipe online where there's so much text beforehand and ads that requires constant scrolling. This criterion should allow for individuals using assistive technology to be able to get right to the information they need without being bogged down by repetitive motions. So these are just some of the guidelines that have been established that make accessing the internet available for everyone. But it's important to understand that this is not the case for every website that is out there. So I decided to show, this is a little bit of an antiquated version of a sip and puff setup for an individual who only has access to do these things through a sip and puff. So basically the tube or wand would then be fed into this environmental control unit on the wheelchair. It can control his wheelchair, but then that has to go to another switch that then sends a signal to this IntelliKey switch, which then gets sent to a wireless signal in a little USB drive that will allow him to access typing and internet access. You can see by some of the buttons in a program called Switch XS. This I found incredibly useful for researching and seeing how people did it. This video was maybe about 10 years old. And as we'll see further in the presentation, the amount of hardware that needs to get plugged in order for someone to go right from the sip and puff to accessing the internet or other programs, TVs, tablets, it's become more simplified, but it's important to understand that this equipment costs money and it requires help to get it set up. And as we can see, before more modern advances with our technology, it would take quite a bit just to be able to do this, but it was possible. So some of the uses we can like adapt sip and puff switches to really speak to how disabilities can drive the innovation of technology that essentially benefits everyone. So some common ones are people use sip and puff to power and move their wheelchairs, to control their computers, tablets, cell phones, speech generation devices, environmental controls, whether it be air conditioning, heating, turning on lights, any of those things that we think of that we do. We make adjustments to make ourselves comfortable through daily life. But there were some very interesting things too. I found information and videos of people using them to control fishing poles. Here's a photo of individuals through the help of the Ronald McDonald Children's Hospital, like sailing, kayaking. I saw one where someone linked it up to firing guns. I mean, the possibilities are endless, I think, especially as technology continues to advance. So that's really promising. So I decided um there's a bunch of different devices out there, sip and puff, and the interfaces that connect. I've seen a wide variance in prices. The sip and puff actual hardware seems to be closely right around the 200 to $250 rate, but the interfaces that then connect from that switch to other hardware, I've seen a wide variance from a couple hundred for very basic and older models to the Teclas E system one was 500, but then there's others that I saw upwards of 1,000. So that is kind of a common complaint, is the amount of money that it might cost to get this technology. But this sip and puff one has, you can choose between an easy flex mount, a gooseneck, one that can be strapped to your head. It comes with the switch, um, right around here, like attaches to around here, that has plugs and cables that will then be compatible with this Tekla E assistive interface. So this interface serves as the switches itself. You could push on it to trigger things, but as you can see, the inputs right here, those would be connected to the sip and puff from its interface. And this one runs on Bluetooth. It's low powered. It can go 48 hours of battery life uninterrupted. It has firmware software that can be upgraded. And this thing is said to be able to control up to 8 devices. I've seen it's app enabled. They can trigger Android, Apple, from smart TVs to tablets to cell phones to computers. It is a really easy to use, intuitive model that's quite simple. And it can be adjusted just like the sip and puff for sensitivity and speed. And I found that this one had relatively positive reviews, but as we can see in this slide, some of the cons, I will say, in searching for reviews in general about sip and puff and specifically these devices, they're few and far between. I couldn't find any scholarly articles that were critically analyzing, but what I did see come up often through YouTube video reviews is that the cost can be a little restrictive for some people, especially if there's no insurance covering it. These devices are super helpful, but for some individuals, they can't afford them. And also it needs to be reinforced again that regardless of buying the hardware that allows you to sip and puff, you still need additional interfaces and hardware to connect it to other devices. So it is a good launching point, but it won't simply trigger all the things you need without additional resources. Most people who are using these are the only individuals using it, but as you can imagine with tubes and mouthpieces, the need to clean them is important for keeping up hygiene. But, they do sell replaceable, disposable mouthpieces and tubes. That'll eventually catch up on cost too. And then I think there's just an adjustment period for getting used to using these switches, which, it's a lot of mouth and jaw movement that might take a little getting used to. But as I mentioned earlier, the sensitivity settings make it so that even the lightest bit of pressure can make these usable for individuals that might be struggling with the strength and power that is needed to control these. So here's my references. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.